And welcome back to Bengal Bites, a podcast about the Cincinnati Bengals from one fan's real, honest perspective. If you're looking for a Homer podcast that's just going to toe the company line and tell you everything that the Bengals team wants you to believe, this is not going to be the podcast for you. I try to have my own independent thoughts, my own opinions about things, whether they're positive or negative. I try to stay mostly positive, but sometimes I can't help it. Sometimes there's just some negative stuff to talk about, and I'm not going to turn a blind eye, Bengals. I'm going to bring that stuff up too. So on this episode 86, we're going to cover what happened since the last episode, which was a couple months ago, back in May. It's been a slow summer, but sometimes no news is good news. There hasn't been a lot of news coming out of Bengals headquarters, and sometimes that's good. There would have been some positive updates we would have liked to hear, but you know what? Sometimes no negative updates is like a positive update. So take the wins where you can get them. Training camp starts this week. We just saw the rookies starting to report for the Bengals this weekend. The veterans are going to be showing up on Tuesday. So things are kicking off. We're going to have lots of stuff to talk about for this upcoming 2025-26 season, and hopefully more successful than it has been the last couple seasons. In this episode, we're going to talk about a few of the news stories that went on. Most notably, there are a couple new future members to the Bengals Ring of Honor, Lamar Parrish and Dave Lapham. They're going to be going in. Some AFC North news for other teams, not the Bengals, but some other teams had some news that will impact the Bengals and their opponents inside the division this year. We saw quarterback Joe Burrow featured on the second season of Netflix's quarterback series. And I won't go into spoilers on that, just a few high-level takeaways from that. But if you're a Bengals fan, make sure you don't miss Joe Burrow on Netflix quarterback. And we'll also discuss some of the players who have been in negotiations with the Bengals. Still some loose ends to tie up, you might say. So we'll talk about that. And also, one of the biggest stories that's probably going to get overlooked by a lot of podcasts is the drama going on currently with the NFL Players Association. The union has gone through some upheaval recently with their executive director resigning abruptly, and then J.C. Tretter, who was the former Players president, union representative, he resigned in disgrace, allegedly to protect his family or whatever he wants to say. But both of those guys are pieces of shit. I'm glad they're gone. The union has to figure out what they're going to do to try to come up with some kind of an answer to the power that is the NFL owners collective. They got found out as being collusive or colluding against the players, but that all got swept under the rug. This guy, Lloyd Howell, who is the executive director for the Players Union, seems like he's a Manchurian candidate. He was working for both sides. He was working for the owners. He's a part-time consultant for a private equity firm, which is investing in NFL teams as owners. So he's partially working for the owners, but he's theoretically supposed to be working for the players. So clearly a conflict of interest. That's why he had to resign in shame. But lots of stuff like that the NFL reporters don't want you, the hardcore fan, to worry about. Just forget about all that stuff. Don't worry about the business aspect of football. They just want you to drink some more beer, buy some more gear, and shut up, sit there and watch football and keep your wallets open and spending money on this product that you can't live without for half the year. But the end will wrap up with some transactions that have occurred. New players coming in, old players going out, and that's the way it goes. So we'll have to see what other transactions the Bengals are able to do. But let's get right into this without further ado. As we said, training camp starts this Saturday. That means it's time to get in or get out. You got to sign your contract or start holding out. And that's going to be the question, who's in, who's out? We've already seen Demetrius Knight, second round linebacker for the Bengals. He was not really holding out, but he, along with a lot of the other second round picks, had not signed their rookie contracts. Most of them had signed participation waivers, which is kind of a promise from the team that even if they got hurt in the offseason OTAs, even if they weren't under contract officially, the team would make good on kind of a handshake agreement, like we'll still sign you to your rookie contract, even as if like you never even got hurt. Demetrius Knight signed that. Shemar Stewart, first round pick, did not sign any kind of waiver. He has not practiced with the team. He left OTAs a day early because he was frustrated he hadn't been able to work out the deals with his rookie contract with the Bengals. And so Demetrius Knight signed his contract along with all the other second round. It was a back and forth with the teams about how much guaranteed money will the second round picks get in their contracts. Obviously, the players want to push for more and more guarantees. Owners want to pay less guarantees. So that was something that was going on. Most teams, as training camp has started, have been able to figure that out with the players and their representation. But as I mentioned, Shemar Stewart, first round pick, didn't work anything out in terms of a waiver, didn't work out his rookie contract with the Bengals, and he has not reported to training camp yet. So it's going to be a standoff in terms of when does Shemar Stewart report for his first training camp with the Bengals. It's not, obviously, not off to a great start between him and this team that drafted him. Some people were speculating maybe he could go back to Texas A&M because he was coming out early, but that seems less likely. He was working out there, but the coach said he wasn't working out with the team. And he said that the thing that doesn't really make you that confident. The coach for Texas A&M said Shemar Stewart doesn't have any intention. There's no intention for him to play for Texas A&M, and he's going to be playing for the Bengals. So obviously, sites like Cincy Jungle and Bengals.com took that and said Texas A&M coach confirms he's not playing at Texas. Shemar Stewart isn't playing at Texas A&M. Well, that's saying he has no intention isn't quite the same thing as saying he's definitely not playing here. So we'll see what the intentions turn out to be. Obviously, the Bengals would like to get their new first-round pick into training camp so he can start working, get up to speed as quickly as possible, especially since the player that he was somewhat replacing, or at least giving them more depth at defensive end, Trey Hendrickson, their first-team All-Pro, who's looking for his new contract extension. He's not satisfied with his 1 year remaining on his deal. I think he's 30, about to turn 31. Trey Hendrickson has been holding out also. So for Shemar Stewart, he's got all the leverage in my mind because he's not like one of these college players who's coming in, who's never made money before. He's just a broke college guy who's just eager to sign that check and get that life-changing money. He's already been in the age of college NIL, where players are getting paid. So he's got a little bit of money in the bank already. He's not just so desperate to sign that rookie paycheck from the Bengals. He'll just take whatever terms that they want him to take. And that's the thing is the Bengals, the reason why they're in this disagreement, all these rookie contracts are pretty much predetermined. The only thing that can really vary is some of the language, how much money is guaranteed, how quickly, and how much money could potentially be voided if a player has any kind of suspension or thing that would cause him to lose some of his guaranteed money. Apparently, the Bengals want to put in a new verbiage, a new wording in Shemar Stewart's contract that would void all guaranteed money in his contract if he gets a void in 1 year. So if he gets a multi-game suspension in one season, it will void all of his later seasons. If he gets popped for PEDs or some kind of whatever it is, all of his money could lose its guarantee. They wouldn't necessarily void his contract, but the money would not be guaranteed. Obviously, first round pick coming in doesn't want to give up guaranteed money because the Bengals aren't offering anything in return. They're not saying, well, we're going to stipulate like you're going to lose these guaranteed money, but to make up for it, we're going to give you this. They're not doing that. They're just saying, here's the contract we want you to sign, take it or leave it. And it's not as good as the contract that previous Bengals first round picks have signed. It's not as good as other contracts. Like Shemar Stewart was the number 17th overall pick. The Bengals are asking him to take a worse deal with less guaranteed money than the number 17 pick from last year's draft, which doesn't make any sense because the salary cap is always increasing. Player salaries are going up. So for the Bengals to ask him to take less guaranteed money than the same pick last year, it's kind of a slap in the face. And a lot of people are wondering, why are the Bengals holding this strong of a stance against their first round pick, especially a player that they need? And Shemar Stewart made headlines because he came out and voiced his opinion after Trey Hendrickson gave his little press conference during training camp and said he was not going to play under his deal. Maybe that gave Shemar Stewart more confidence to go out in front of the media and tell them he wasn't happy with the way the Bengals were treating him, and he felt like it was the Bengals were more interested in winning an argument than winning games. And that was an amazing quote to me, because how many Bengals fans have said something almost exactly like that, word for word? I'm sure I have said something like that on this podcast before about how the Bengals keep fooling around, trying to make these cheap deals, trying to save money, gain power and control over players instead of just doing the right thing to be successful on the football field. It seems like they would rather, save as much money as possible, be as cheap and as thrifty as possible, try to extract as much money out of the fans, out of the state of Ohio for a new stadium, out of Hamilton County for this stadium lease deal that they've tentatively agreed to. All this stuff doesn't help the Bengals get to the ultimate goal of winning a Super Bowl. I don't even know, like I said, I don't even know if the Bengals have a Super Bowl as their goal at all, or if it's just bottom line, keeping control over these players so they can keep the money flowing into their pockets, the owner's pockets, that is. So Shemar Stewart, he's not showing up. I don't expect him to show up anytime soon if the Bengals don't change their offer. And the fact that Trey Hendrickson is out gives Stewart that much more leverage, because you got to think about, he's supposedly drafted to replace Trey Hendrickson. Well, Trey Hendrickson's sitting out, so there's no hurry for Stewart to get into practice. His spot is already guaranteed. They're not going to cut him. Like, they're not going to get rid of a first-round pick. They're not going to trade him away, because we know the Bengals don't do trades or make any deals that would be intelligent. So they're going to keep him squat on his rights, and maybe he could sit out and theoretically maybe try to enter next year's draft, but that's going to be a whole year of missing out on his rookie pay. So eventually Shemar Stewart is going to show up and get paid, but he's not going to be in any hurry because Trey Hendrickson hasn't signed his contract. He's not in camp either. So if Trey Hendrickson is not there, I wouldn't show up if I was Shemar Stewart either, because he's still got leverage as long as Trey Hendrickson is not under contract. The Bengals can't afford to have Hendrickson and Stewart both out. So somebody has got to get what they want. Whoever that is, then the next guy will have to have a little bit less leverage. But I don't know who's going to be first. I would expect, I don't know. It's interesting because, like I said, both of them probably will play. I don't expect Trey Hendrickson to honestly sit out the entire season, even though he said he's got to do, what's best for his family or whatever. And so apparently that means he can't play for $17 million or whatever it is this season. So his family really wants him to get paid as much as TJ Watt or whoever it is. TJ Watt just got a new contract that put him up there a little bit higher than Myles Garrett in the, was it like $30 million a year? I think TJ Watt got 3 years, $120 and a little bit over $120 million. Wait, if I can do the math, that's $40 million. Oh, more than $30 million, $40 million a year. Trey Hendrickson's not getting anywhere close to that. So, family or no family, I think Trey Hendrickson should just say, hey, I want to be paid what I'm worth. Now, Bengals, I'm sure, are going to come back at Trey Hendrickson and say, well, Trey Hendrickson, sacks don't tell the whole story. There were a lot of times last year where Trey Hendrickson was getting sacks like in situations where it didn't even really matter. The game was out of hand and he's, like against, I think he had like a bunch of sacks against the Raiders and Gardner Minshew and Desmond Ridder. Like whether he had a sack in that game or not didn't really make any difference for the outcome. But then there was games where Trey Hendrickson kind of disappeared. Specifically like the Eagles game, he was going against backup Fred Johnson, left tackle for the Eagles, and Trey Hendrickson didn't even get any pressure at all throughout the game. So there's times where Trey Hendrickson makes an impact, times where Trey Hendrickson disappears. And particularly in the run game, he's not especially great in defending against the run. He's more of a pure pass rusher. So he's situational. He's not an every down. Teams on offense aren't really scheming, oh no, what do we do to avoid Trey Hendrickson? Like sometimes it seems like teams run right at Trey Hendrickson and there's not much he can do about it. So that's where I don't put him in the league of a Myles Garrett, a TJ Watt, guys like that. Even though he has the same stats in terms of sacks, that's not the only statistic that matters. So we'll have to see where they come down on that. Trey has been adamant that he's not going to play under this deal. We'll have to see. But training camp, the season is long. Training camp is long. Just like Jamar Chase sat out most of training camp, and then he had a pretty good season, winning the Triple Crown last year. Yeah, he got off to a little bit of a slow start in week 1. But like I said, long season. If I was a player, missing one game, that's, one game that or all that training camp, that's just opportunity for you to get injured, honestly. So I would rather, if I were a player, I would rather not put myself at risk. Don't get injured. Only show up for the games that truly matter, that you're getting paid for, and forget all the other stuff. But speaking of Desmond Ridder, I guess while we're on the topic, Desmond Ridder, UC Bearcat alum, signed today as the backup quarterback for the Bengals. He's going to be number 3 or 4 on the depth chart, but his signing means that Logan Woodside can finally get the F up off the Bengals roster. He was nothing but dead weight. He was never going to play last year. Did you see him getting annihilated against the Chicago Bears in that preseason game? It looked like he had no business being on an NFL field. So Logan Woodside, he's off the team. Another person who's not going to be on the Bengals this year, Travion Williams, running back. He surprisingly got signed to the Patriots. I doubt he's going to make the team with them either, but he's not going to be on the Bengals anymore. Thank the Lord. Bengals picked up a couple defensive tackles, which was surprising. They waited right up until the last second to pick up anybody on defensive tackle. They didn't draft anybody there, even though it was a deep defensive tackle class. One of these guys coming in was a former first-round pick in 2018 for the Jacksonville Jaguars. We'll have to see if either of these guys make the team. They could just be some depth for training camp, but if they're getting rid of kind of these dead weight players on the team, I want more competition. The thing that I hated in past years was seeing guys stick around, hang around on the team, even though they were obviously never going to contribute on the field. I'm talking about guys like Uncle Mike Thomas, where they're talking about, oh, this guy's going to be like a mentor for the young guys. Like, they don't need mentors. They don't need these guys coming in and just taking up roster spots. Get some guys who can actually play, like I've been saying over and over. So hopefully some of these guys can contribute. I think they also got a backup center. Part of that was because a couple guys started on the physically unable to perform list, those being Eric All Jr., the tight end out of Michigan and Iowa, who he's going to miss the entire 2025 season with that torn ACL. He re-injured the same ACL he injured back in college. He's going to have multiple surgeries to repair that, and it's not going to be a quick turnaround as you wouldn't expect. We also saw Seth McLaughlin, the center out of Ohio State. He's still rehabbing a torn Achilles. tendon that he suffered last season. So he could come back at some point midway through the season, but he's starting off on the unable to perform list. So he's going to miss at least the first 4 games. So a couple transactions for the Bengals, but we didn't see too much in terms of signings or anything like that. Obviously, the Steelers have been making moves in the AFC North. They signed their quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. Finally, that had been rumored for a long time, but I guess Aaron Rodgers didn't want to show up for OTAs, didn't want to practice with the team in the offseason, but he's been seen throwing some passes to DK Metcalf in the offseason. Steelers also made a big trade. They traded Minkah Fitzpatrick back to the Dolphins. They originally traded for Minkah from the Dolphins for a first-round pick. Now they're trading Minkah back to the Dolphins, and they're going to pick up Jalen Ramsey, cornerback, defensive back, longtime nemesis of A.J. Green. He was originally a first-round pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars as well. And the Steelers also got Jonnu Smith, tight end, from the Dolphins. So the Steelers are really loading up. Some people are saying, that they got Rodgers, they got TJ Watt signed, they got Cam Hayward. A lot of big name players are on the Steelers. So people are saying, the Steelers are all in this year. They're all in. I mean, I guess so. They're, you would say, more all in than like the Cleveland Browns. That's for sure. The Browns look like they're going to do another tankathon this year. They look like they're going to intentionally try to lose as many games as possible, like they did, 2018, or when Hugh Jackson was the head coach and they didn't win a single game so they could get the number 1 overall pick. Seems like that's what they're going for this year, because they traded away the number 2 overall pick, which could have given them Travis Hunter. They went with, Mason Graham out of Michigan, and then a bunch of other draft picks. So they're loading up on draft picks for next season. They got 2 quarterbacks. One of them, Dylan Gabriel, in the 3rd round. The other one, Shedeur Sanders, in the 5th round. Neither one of those quarterbacks seems like they're, starting NFL franchise quarterback caliber. Don't fall for the hype on Shedeur Sanders. He's not any good. But I'm perfectly fine if Cleveland Browns fans want to think Shedeur Sanders is good. They got Joe Flacco, they got Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, and don't forget Deshaun Watson is still technically on the team, and he's trying to maybe rehab and come back at some point. But 5 quarterbacks in Cleveland, none of them are especially enticing for a Browns fan. But some people are, good thing I'm not a Browns fan. That's all I got to say. I can't imagine getting excited for a season with those guys as the quarterback. But no, we got Joe Burrow, the Bengals quarterback. And like I mentioned, Joe Burrow was featured on Netflix quarterback series. And that was definitely the most intimate, in-depth look we've got to see at Joe Burrow. He doesn't give interviews very much. He's very closed off to the media. So we get to see a little bit inside Joe Burrow's inner circle. We got to see some of his parents talking about him as a young kid growing up. We got to see Joe interacting with his teammates, with his coaches. Got to see how he is during the games, during the week and practice and all that kind of stuff. So just very interesting. No spoilers, but I mean, not that there really could be a spoiler. This season was taken from last year. So it's all stuff, a lot of it we had seen before, especially on Hard Knocks. So some of the clips were actually recycled from Hard Knocks on HBO last season. But they did add a little bit more context to some things around Joe Burrow. They showed him after the break-in at his house. He was discussing how that impacted him. He originally was going to get the Batmobile, but then he decided after that whole incident, Batmobile has been canceled. So this was kind of interesting because it's giving you an insight into Joe Burrow, what he's thinking, how vulnerable he is. He mentioned how he doesn't feel like he was especially good at getting up and being a team leader, giving a rah-rah, fire everybody up kind of speech. That wasn't really his forte. And he just talked about, what he's good at. They showed him talking about when he's coming into the season, he tries to be a little bit too careful, not turn the ball over, and maybe he's just got to be more aggressive. So it's going to be interesting to see how he plays this season, given what he said on this series about how his body feels like he's getting ready and ready to go when it's summertime, off season, and just what his mindset is. And the thing that's going to be interesting, especially this off season, is the fact that Joe Burrow is coming in without any injuries. He's not rehabbing from anything. He doesn't have to recover from surgery or anything like that. So this is going to be, knock on wood, we always say this like every offseason, but knock on wood, this is going to be the first full offseason without any COVID, without any appendicitis, without any ACL or wrist or calf injury or anything. We want Joe Burrow 100% for week 1 against the Cleveland Browns in Cleveland. And they're going to need it because the Cleveland Browns have had the number of the Bengals the last few seasons. I mean, recently, when Deshaun Watson blew his Achilles out and they had to bring in DTR, Bengals were able to pull off the win. But outside of that, when the Browns have had a actual quarterback recently, they've been beating up on the Bengals. So hopefully the Bengals, and hopefully it doesn't rain. If it rains, it's over with. But, hopefully it's a bright, sunny day. They come out ready to go. Now, one thing the Bengals have changed in training camp is Bengals are starting their practices at 10 a.m. Previous years, they have started it more towards, I want to say like noon, 12:30, towards the afternoon when it gets hot. And obviously, it's a lot harder to practice when it's super hot and humid and muggy outside. So maybe that's part of the strategy to get the Bengals players off to a better start when it comes to these first couple weeks. As we know, I think Zach Taylor is 1-11 or something ridiculous like that. Very poor schedule for Zach Taylor and the Bengals in the first 2 weeks of the season. They got to figure out whatever it is. They can't just keep saying, oh, we got to get off to a fast start, get off to a better start, faster start. That doesn't mean anything. You got to come in and play top quality football from the get-go. You can't wait a week to get started. One other minor story coming out of the Bengals this offseason was a tentative agreement between the Bengals and Hamilton County to extend their lease of Paycor Stadium. They haven't actually signed it as far as I know, but they just agreed tentatively in principle it's a shorter lease. It's not like 25 years or whatever it was last time. I think it's like 10 years. And this time the Bengals are actually going to pay rent like they should have been doing the entire time. I don't know. I think last time they extended their lease or signed the lease to the stadium right after the Cleveland Browns moved from Cleveland to Baltimore. So maybe the city of Cincinnati was scared that the Bengals were going to leave. So they gave them this sweet deal in the stadium. But now it's like, okay, they're just taking advantage of the situation, the Bengals that is. So I don't feel bad. If I was a taxpayer in Hamilton County, which I am not, but if I were a taxpayer, and especially if I didn't even care anything about football, I'd be like, why are we paying millions of dollars for this football stadium when there's so many other more important things that the money could be going to? People are hungry. People are, living in poverty. We don't really need to subsidize billionaire Mike Brown and the rest of his family so they can have nicer offices at their stadium that they barely pay anything for. So good that the Bengals are staying in Cincinnati. I mean, I hope they make the stadium nicer because it's kind of falling behind all the other stadiums in the NFL, but it doesn't really make any difference to me. I watch most of the games on television, so I barely see the stadium anyway. The stadium experience is, I've been to a game in Paycor Stadium. I've been to other NFL games and other stadiums. I actually prefer watching the game on TV, the games on television, because you get to see more. You don't have to pay a ridiculous amount of money. And, it's more comfortable, more convenient. Everything's just better when you watch the game from the comfort of your own home. So I know it would be a horrible day in Cincinnati if the Bengals ever did leave. But as long as the Bengals franchise stayed intact and they didn't change the uniforms or something, I really wouldn't care if they moved to Columbus or Dayton or wherever. I'd still watch the games and cheer on the team either way. So, yeah, we'll see. I don't think it's really going to make too much of a difference for me, the fan, on this upcoming season. But something else that's probably not going to make too much of a difference, like I already mentioned, Lloyd Howell, Players Union Executive Director, resigns, and most players, unfortunately, I would assume they're not going to get asked about this. Some of them might not really even know anything about that. If they're focused on getting ready for the season, they may have no idea who Lloyd Howell even is. Or they'll say something like, oh, that's above my pay grade, or some similar type of bullshit answer that is, a cop out. But Lloyd Howell, this guy who is worked for one of these big consulting firms, Booz Allen Hamilton, the chief financial officer there. And oh, he also happens to be a part-time consultant for the Carlyle Group, which happens to be a private equity firm that is one of the few organizations that is approved to purchase ownership stakes in NFL franchises. So he works for this ownership group, but also they hired him and paid Lloyd Howell $3.8 million a year to be the executive director of the Players Union. So he's getting paid on both sides, or he was, until some reporters brought up this conflict of interest. And then, to my chagrin, they had a lot of people from the Players Union executive board, committee, whatever, come out supporting this guy, saying, oh, he's such a great guy. We can't let the media tear us apart and try to, ruin what we're trying to do here. We got all the support in the world behind this guy. And then like a day later, he resigned under the premise of he didn't want to create a distraction for the union and take away from what they're trying to do. Like, obviously this dude is a fucking snake, and he has a conflict of interest every which way. He's not working for the players' benefit. The players are just not paying attention, and here's this guy making millions of dollars off of their hard work under the premise that he's helping them, when in fact he's just working for the owners. So screw that guy. I'm glad he's gone. Also, J.C. Tretter, who used to play for the Browns, so F him, but he resigned. He used to be like the former player representative, head player rep, and also somehow got this chief strategy officer title, which I don't even know what that means. But he resigned today under the premise of protecting his family from all the hard, stressful scrutiny he's been under from the evil media. The only scrutiny that was coming was because he was a lying piece of shit. So when he says like, when guys say like, oh, my family, I can't have them go through this, he's the one responsible for what his family is going through. The only thing his family is going through is hearing about how their dad is a lying piece of shit in the media. And he's like, oh, I don't want my family to hear about what a piece of shit I am. Whatever. So screw that guy. Also, I'm glad he's gone. Hopefully somebody is going to step up and be a voice of reason and responsibility and actually stand up for the players' rights and not just work for whatever Roger Goodell and the owners want the players to do. The owners have been talking about, hey, right now it's a 50-50 split between ownership and players. And every time the salary cap goes up, that means we have to pay these players a lot more money. I'm sure they're scheming to find out some way where they can force the players to not take that 50-50 revenue split. Take maybe a flat rate or just any way that the owners can pay the players less. That's what they're going to try to do. And they're going to, just like they did with this guy, Lloyd Howell, they're going to try to put somebody in power who's going to do what the ownership wants to do and not work in the best interest of the players. I hope that it doesn't happen again like it just did 2 years ago with this guy, Lloyd Howell. They brought him in, secret committee meetings, secret vote. They didn't let any candidates become public. Nobody knew what was going on. All of a sudden, oh, this guy Lloyd Howell, he's a new president of the union. Oh, okay. Well, who is that? I don't know, but let's hope he works out for the team, or hopes he works out for the players. oh, actually, he was working for the owners. Well, that didn't seem to work out so well. So I don't know what's going to come of that. Like I said, most of these players probably aren't paying attention. Most of the fans probably aren't paying attention, but it's a big deal for the sport, for the league. And just like, so the biggest problem was the NFL owners got caught colluding against the players so that they wouldn't have to pay them guaranteed contracts. This collusion went to arbitration. They ruled against the NFL, but then it wasn't released to the public. They signed a confidentiality agreement so that nobody knew about it for months. Nobody knew that the NFL owners had colluded against the players. This is all kept under wraps. And if you're the players' union leader, you should be out there saying, hey, players, you guys need to know that the owners are trying to rip us off. But no, he was all making deals with the owners. Let's keep it quiet. Nobody needs to know about this. Why? So, yeah, just disgraceful behavior by the head of the players union. And the players deserve better. Because like I say, I'm always on the side of the players. But sometimes the players need to stand up and fight for themselves. So hopefully guys like Ted Karras on the Bengals, he's one of the people on the player one of the player representatives. So guys like that really need to step up and hold their leaders accountable and not just assume that their leadership has their best interest. And same goes for you out there. Don't just assume that your leaders have your interest in heart. You got to make sure that they're accountable. So that's all I wanted to say in this quick, shortened episode of Bengal Bites. Getting back into the swing of things. I've been out of it for too long. So I'm trying a new thing with the video in this episode. We'll see how this turns out. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's bad. We'll have to see. But give me some comments down below. Let me know what you think of the new video format. I mean, this is an audio-only podcast, but for whatever reason, it seems to be more popular on YouTube. So I got to have some kind of visuals for the YouTube video. So if you're on YouTube, let me know what you think. Otherwise, we'll be back before you know it with a breakdown probably next week of all the comings and goings. Hopefully we'll be able to talk about some signings by star defensive ends like Shemar Stewart and Trey Hendrickson. We want to see good production out of Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, all those guys in training camp. Everybody stay healthy. Oh, and one last thing before I go. Netflix quarterback series with Joe Burrow. Probably the best part for me. Episode 6. That was where they played the Tennessee Titans. That was the game where Joe Burrow was going off, cussing out Zach Taylor. And we finally got to hear the audio from that. Everybody was speculating, oh, what was Joe Burrow saying to Zach Taylor? We could obviously see he was saying F that, but what was the rest of it? So it was Joe Burrow was so upset because Bengals kept committing penalties on offense. False start, holding, delay of game, bunch of different penalties all up and down the field. And so Joe Burrow came off to the sideline. He was mad. And Zach Taylor came over to him and he's like, oh, good job at the end of the game there. Good job driving it. And Joe Burrow was just like, fuck that, man. Like, we committed 8 false start penalties out there. We look ridiculous. And Zach Taylor didn't have shit to say back. He was like, oh, I mean, it's okay. I know. We're good. All good. Zach Taylor is such a bitch. He has nothing to say in response to Joe Burrow, even when he's getting cussed out. Zach Taylor can't even reply. He's just like, okay, all right. Okay, sounds good. So I really wish the Bengals would get a real head coach. I don't want the Bengals to have to lose to get rid of Zach Taylor. I wish Joe Burrow would just go into the ownership and just say, hey, can we get a new head coach? Like, this guy sucks. Because I know Joe Burrow is going to say all the right things to the media, but I can't honestly believe that he really likes Zach Taylor, especially if they're losing. Like, I know they replaced Lou Anarumo as defensive coordinator. They made him the scapegoat. Al Golden is supposed to come in, be the new defensive coordinator. Everything's supposed to change. Well, they still have the same head coach. A lot of the same coaches are there. And I know they replaced Frank Pollock, offensive line coach. They replaced a bunch of guys, but they still have the same head coach. And if the same results keep coming up, 9-8, miss the playoffs, it's not good enough. They need to get somebody else in there. I don't want to see Zach Taylor stick around, hang around, be Mr. Nice Guy just because he doesn't cause any waves. He doesn't speak poorly about the franchise, the organization. He's always saying everything to back up the Brown family and make them look good. So he does toe the company line. That's great. But I feel like that's why Dave Lapham has lasted so long in his role as broadcaster. Dave Lapham, he's not even good at broadcasting, but he always says things that Mike Brown wants to hear and says how great Mike Brown is as an owner and what an amazing guy Mike Brown's father, Paul Brown, was. And he's always telling these Paul Brown stories like anybody cares at this point. The only person who cares is probably Mike Brown. I feel like Dave Lapham is speaking to an audience of one. He's speaking to his boss, Mike Brown, saying all this stuff that Mike Brown wants to hear. Nobody on the radio listening to Dave Lapham wants to hear him go, woo, yeah, and say nothing else the whole game. So anyway, that was a tangent. Congratulations to Dave Lapham and Lamar Parrish for being inducted into the Ring of Honor. I would say more Lamar Parrish on the field had better contributions than Dave Lapham. Dave Lapham was like a rotational offensive lineman, never made any Pro Bowls, All Pros, or anything, never had any awards as a player. So I would say, who really cares about Dave Lapham? But Lamar Parrish, on the other hand, multiple Pro Bowler, All Pro, multiple interceptions and kicks returned for touchdowns. He was a dynamic playmaker, one of the first stars for the Bengals back in the 60s. And it was him and Ken Riley that were really a dynamic duo on the defensive backfield. Like I said, made Pro Bowls and Pro Bowls between them. And they were kind of competing with each other because Parrish got more Pro Bowls, Riley got more All Pros. And it was kind of a thing where like, well, you can't have, two cornerbacks on the same team both make it to the Pro Bowl. So it's kind of a weird thing, but congratulations to Lamar Parrish. At this point, the Ring of Honor, they're kind of getting towards the end of people you would say like, no doubt about it. Not really first ballot, but it's weird that they have this voting process to get these guys into the Ring of Honor. They should just put in the people who are deserving and not make it some kind of popularity contest where you're pitting old players against each other. These guys are like in their 60s and 70s. And I'm sure they're saying, well, why does Dave Lapham get in? He wasn't even that good. Like, I was way better than him. And they're still waiting to get in. So it's an unfortunate situation that the team has put the fans and the players in. This is long overdue. They should just put in a bunch of players and stop making it a popularity contest. But anyway, I said this episode was over like 10 minutes ago. So I'm going to get out of here. And with that, I'm going to leave you with a hoo day and stay hungry for more Bengal Bites.